Georgia, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how long have you been in Halifax? You grew up here?
I grew up outside the city, Waverly actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then off to university.
Yep.
Tell me about when you decided to go to school, moving out of the house the first time. I mean, we're just a few weeks from the start of school for university year. What was that like for you when you went to school? I'm assuming since you graduated it was a few years ago.
Yeah, so that would have looked like 2018 for me. I went to Acadia University and I was really excited just to get out of the house, get out of my hometown. I didn't grow up in a city, so it was really exciting just to have the prospect to be able to walk down the street, see my friends, and be able to access anything I needed in the town. And more than that, just to experience all that I had heard about post-secondary education.
Yeah, your parents both teachers, so I'm sure they were saying, you're gonna love it. Did you stay on campus? Did you live in res?
Yeah, I lived in residence for my first year and then actually my second as well as a residence assistant.
Okay, so it's not unusual for first or second year to stay on campus because it's easier.
Yeah.
And how much of a challenge is it in 2023 to get in res? Because I know a lot of international students have moved in and there's, enrollment is up, we're told. So it sounds like it's kind of a challenge if you don't have, access to a space on campus.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things that come into play there. Enrollment is up, like you said, and we have over 50% of our students coming from out of province or international. Right. So that being said, that's over half of our students here that need housing. And when we're looking at on campus, the challenge there is that sometimes it's actually more expensive to be living on our campuses in Nova Scotia than it is to find housing off campus. But then the struggle is there rooms? We know there are wait lists across the province for many of our universities. And in the cases where there's not and there is vacancy, those residences might not be meeting the demands of students.
Okay, you're with Students Nova Scotia explain to me what it is that Students Nova Scotia is.
Sure, so we're an advocacy group. We represent over 20,000 students across the province. Right now our membership is 4, so we have our rural universities like Cape Breton University, Acadia and St. FX, and we also represent St. Mary's University here in Halifax. And our role is to have conversations with stakeholders, with government and organizations, and really represent the student voice, the concerns that we're hearing from students, and really their needs broadly across the province.
I know you advocate for students, but do they call you up directly and go, hey, Georgia?
Sometimes.
Yeah?
Not always. That's mostly what our delegates are for.
Okay.
So I work with a board of directors who inform me about what's happening on their campuses, and their vice president externals and their presidents who work with teams of executives that really work hands-on at all the campuses that they represent.
How big an issue right now is student housing?
Student housing is a huge issue right now. It's no secret there's a housing crisis in Nova Scotia, but students are an especially vulnerable population that have very unique needs and also challenges when it comes to housing, particularly that they're first-time tenants. There's not a whole lot of information available, and often they need short-term housing, and landlords aren't as often wanting to rent to students when the turnover might not be longer than a few years. So that's really the struggle there as well.
And they may be out in April, May after graduation or at the end of the term, and then either you rent it year-round or you have to find another place.
Yeah.
I see, almost every one of the universities on their page have off-campus housing suggestions or perhaps guidance. But as you point out, I mean, it's tough to find a place anywhere because the vacancy rate is less than 1%. It's been that way for a couple of years. So you kind of dodged a bullet because you were in school prior to, or was it a challenge then for you?
It was certainly a challenge as well. I was thankful to be going to a school outside of downtown Halifax at the time, but things have changed, and that's not the reality for our rural communities and our rural schools either anymore. So while it was not the easiest, it's certainly become a lot harder. I do know that rents have increased dramatically, drastically across the province for particularly those rural communities, as well as in Halifax. Places where it was typically cheaper to go to school because housing was cheaper, that's no longer the case. because as those students graduate and move on, landlords have the opportunity to up the price for new tenants moving in.
Right, because they don't have to renovate because they know there's going to be a turnover because of the academic year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So when you get to have the ear of a government, tell me about the first meeting when you said, we're told we want to hear from you, or you said I want to hear what you have to offer. Tell me about that.
So my first meeting with government?
Yeah.
It went well. We met with the Department of Advanced Education, mostly to present the Memorandum of Understanding recommendations for the upcoming year. So housing is on that list amongst a variety of other things. We knew at the time that the provincial student housing strategy was set to come out. That was in the spring, so it's been the longest spring ever, as we say at home office right now. Time has certainly passed. I think that the conversations initially and are still ongoing are positive, but we are still waiting on that strategy to come out.
No strategy?
Not yet, no.
Nothing in writing, nothing that says here's the way forward?
No, at this present time there is not.
We're hearing this, I think, all across the country, that housing is an issue, that affordable housing specifically is a real issue. And when the government says, 80,000, there's 80,000 students attending post-secondary institutions across Nova Scotia. That means 80,000 people need a place to stay and not on campus. Not likely it's going to be an option for many of those. I don't know if you saw that the provincial government this week said, oh, we've got an option here. It's Happipad. It's a third-party app that 130,000 rooms are available living in other people's homes. What's the reaction? Have you heard from people, students, specifically about what they think of this idea?
Yeah. So I think that it's great that the government is putting some steps forward in terms of finding short-term fixes to the problems. That's really what it is, and that's what we're hearing from students as well. The reality is there are students that will be looking for programs like this because there really aren't any other options. And that's really where the emphasis lies, is that this is a great kind of piece of duct tape for right now. I think it does really patch that hole that we know exists. There's not a whole lot of time in terms of short term for building new infrastructure and whatnot, looking at this fall term. It's already August right now, fall is right around the corner. So in terms of short-term solutions, immediate solutions, I think this one is going to serve students. But in the long run, of course, there are challenges. And what we really need to see is that long-term strategy come out from the provincial government. And as far as what students think, I guess we'll have to see what the uptake is like. I can imagine there will be students who aren't necessarily thrilled about the prospect of living in a house with, a family or whoever. And I can be sure that there are homeowners that aren't looking to do that either. That being said, it will benefit those who really do need this right now. And I think there are communities that will be served by it. So I guess we'll just have to see how the rollout goes.
That to me seems to be the challenge. The government is saying, yes, it's a solution, and I think it's fair to say, yeah, it's an option. I love the duct tape analogy because it's something. It's not nothing.
Yeah.
It's something. But how many homeowners, I don't know if your parents, if you have other siblings, but are they going to want to welcome back someone to their home who's going to university again? Maybe they would be cool with that. Maybe that would be something they would do.
I can't speak for my parents specifically. They're not in the province right now.
So the house is empty?
Yeah, actually, my sibling is there.
Oh, okay, cool.
But that being said, I have had calls from folks that have seen, publications come out over the last year highlighting that students have nowhere to live. There are residents across the province, there are citizens of Nova Scotia that have taken students into their homes. Mm-hmm. They're doing it without an app, they're doing it without any paperwork, without background checks. And we know that there are more that are looking to do that. So I think an app like this or a program looks to kind of bridge that gap where we're already seeing students moving in with very kind, hospitable Nova Scotians. This just allows for a bit more safety and stability for those types of circumstances. So I do think that it assists in that kind of regard, but it's certainly not going to be for everybody.
let's go back for a second. I want to ask about the memorandum of understanding. And how do you prioritize? I mean, just weeks out from the start of another semester, and here it is, we have people who will be looking to move somewhere. Or do you think that there's going to be students who don't go to school? Or will there be students who end up traveling for, hours to commute because that's the only way that they can get there?
Yeah, so we know the reality is housing is an access issue. If students don't have access to housing, they don't have access to post-secondary education. I know that there are students that do sleep in their cars. There are students who are homeless, and that happens here in this province. That is the reality of the situation in Nova Scotia. So of course it creates barriers for folks to access their education. And I think that's really the point that we're at now, that we're seeing, student housing being such a widespread topic across the country, because there are students of all ages that are unable to, access that post-secondary education that they should have rights to.
Is housing, number 2 on the list, number 1 on the list, number 4? Like, where does it fit on your priority or Students Nova Scotia priority?
So because we have a board of directors, we turn over every year. Right now it's still in our top 3 priorities going into 2023-24. It was a top priority last year as well. I would be amiss to say that I think it's going to stay unless we see some major changes, because at this point in time, I sit here right now knowing that not a lot has been done since these conversations were had a year ago. So we're still at the same place in terms of advocating for student housing. Especially in Nova Scotia, we have the opportunity to tackle this right now and be proactive in certain aspects. Look at long-term and short-term solutions that would put us ahead of other provinces, because we know that this is a struggle across the country.
What else is on that list? Tuition?
Tuition is, of course, on the list. Yeah. So that would look like there's tuition on the list. We comment on anything that previously existed in the Memorandum of Understanding. This year is actually the first year, because they're up for renewal every 4 years, that housing has been in the Memorandum of Understanding. It's our recommendation. We hope to see that uptake because we're not in the negotiating parties. We just provide our recommendations to the university side of things as well as the government. But this will be the first year that is included.
How much does politics play in this whole conversation?
That's a great question. I think that as far as politics come, everybody wants to see the housing crisis solved. I think it's just more about where the priorities lie in terms of the government and our universities in solving this.
It's kind of a balance, though, isn't it? Because if you're seen to be constantly hammering away at the party in power, the government and the minister, are they going to want to work with you? The other side of it is, if you don't speak up, are they going to hear your concerns? And that sounds to me like a real challenge for Georgia and the whole Students Nova Scotia movement.
I suppose you're right. But we do keep really good relationships with advanced education and the other departments that we work with. I meet with them almost monthly at this point in time, and it's been good working, especially with the civil service, as well as with the university senior administrators. I work with university presidents and speak to folks on that side as well. And I think at this point, Students Nova Scotia is considered to be some of the experts on student housing. I hear from students. We have a board in this organization that's really set out to do this very work. We put out a report on student housing recommendations last year, and I think that we're often looked to for if not the decision making, then it is our recommendations and suggestions. And we make sure to let them know where we're at as we're waiting for things to happen, which is unfortunately often the position that students are put in. But it doesn't mean that we aren't proactively having these conversations and being included, if not directly at the table, then in the conversations to the side.
I'm a parent of a grad, so my concern is like in most situations, parents get invested in the elementary school system when their kids are young, and they care about what's happening. And then once the kids move on, then it's middle school, and then high school, and then in university, and then they're out of school. So parents, there might be a lot of people like me who go, I'm so out of touch, or I feel like I'm out of touch, but what can I do to help? What is it that we can offer for folks like as a call to action to make a difference?
For parents specifically?
Or for anyone in society right now?
I would say one, pay attention to what's going on, pay attention to the news. I think the struggle often is folks are pinning, well, we have a housing crisis, so why should we be focused on students? The reality is like students are a part of a group of vulnerable people that have a lower access to their housings, as well as to post-secondary education, as well as to being able to access food and transport and gas in the economy that we see ourselves in post-COVID. If you were to look at the statistics, take time, ask students, talk to the people around you. We have a lot of international students that go to school in this province that I think are not always heard by the communities that they live in. I would say, spend some more time in kind of that soft ask way, just being more mindful, I guess, of the communities that you're a part of and who are the students that live there. How are they doing? Do you know who they are? That would be one side of things. And then in terms of more concrete asks, we're looking for partnership with towns right now. There are several different community kind of boards and committees that work across the province with their universities, with their students, with their landlords, with residences of the town. I went to Acadia, there's an example of one there. We need to strengthen these, we need to create more of them and see more engagement from residents as well as folks that have positions in the housing market, like our landlords, in terms of being able to communicate with each other and address the problems from a community consensus base. I think that those for the general folks living in Nova Scotia who are concerned would be great ways to get involved.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on the good neighbor thing, because every year in September there's the story in the news about parties that get a little bit out of hand, or and I'm not asking you to comment on that, but everything's tied in. There are no simple answers. There's it's a complex situation. Market conditions, as you point out, foreign student enrollment is up, and international student enrollment is up, and I guess, just to put it in perspective, right now, this very day, if someone came to you and said, I need to find a place, we're a few weeks out, which is harder, finding a place to live in Halifax for a student or getting Taylor Swift tickets? It's kind of a joke.
Okay.
but it's tough, right? It is tough to find. And it's going to be a challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
For the foreseeable future.
I think supply is, a huge part of the conversation in itself. But the other side of that is the lack of information. Students are coming, like I said, from out of province, and international students at a higher percentage than students that are from the province. So that already creates barriers in terms of being able to find somewhere to live when you haven't been there before, or you're not from there. And I think that, especially for our international students, they're having to navigate Facebook Marketplace in Nova Scotia, in a town, from countries and time zones away. We've seen instances of fraud, of places not existing, but they're being told that they have a place to live. They get here and all of a sudden either it's not what they expected, or maybe it's not even there.
Right, and they lose a deposit, and
Yeah, so students in that sense are vulnerable as well, and don't have access to information. There's no housing boards, there's no online portals, there's nowhere to go, really. I live in Halifax, and I know that the majority of folks that I know have to turn to social media or to Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji in order to find a place to live. And that becomes increasingly difficult when you don't know those kind of details and you don't know how to navigate those kinds of markets.
I know in the media world and the journalism world, there would be a point of time that would be my choice to say, what didn't I ask you that you think is important? What didn't we touch on that you think people should know about?
I think that universities have a bigger role to play in student housing. We talk a lot about, the government funding and programs, and that's incredibly important. I think everybody, though, is equally responsible in helping to solve the student housing crisis. Students aren't going to be the ones that are able to lift themselves out of this with the debt that we already face. as a population that's struggling. But that's being said, universities are the ones recruiting students to their campuses. They know what the numbers look like. And they have a responsibility to ensure that these students are going to have places to live. Whether it's residents or off campus, having those supports like an off-campus housing officer, creating some kind of resources for tenancy rights education on their campuses, and really just being advocates for student housing. This is something that these conversations that we're having right now were never included in universities, say even 5 years ago. But the times have changed, and we need to be looking at this from a broader perspective of everybody who's involved. And I just think universities have, they have to step up like everybody else.
Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate this because I know that there are parents and students and people in our communities who are worried, and as you say, 5 years ago it was an issue, but it wasn't the issue that it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Georgia, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's nice to meet you.
You too.
Awesome.